Go. Good evening. I'm Steve Burgess. Welcome to Fundamental Freedoms. I'm Steve Burgess. I'm broadcasting from my home in Utah.
And yes, people can hear me. I'm broadcasting from my home in Ontario, and this is fundamentalfreedoms.org. Steve and I publish at Facebook. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe so that you're notified of next videos. We also publish these videos at Rumble and at YouTube. Back to you, Steve.
So, Fundamental Freedoms, we believe that good society is based on good conversation. It's okay to not come to a conversation ready to do battle. It's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to have a lot of respect, even for those people that we disagree with.
Steve and I put together this podcast, this stream, and we agreed to two principles, I guess, or rules. One of them is that we avoid undefined they statements. If we ever use the word they, we try to be very specific about who we're talking about. And we also avoid undefined we or us statements because we're individuals. And when we come together like this, we're speaking not on behalf of any group or affiliation or someone that we might associate with. We're speaking as an individual.
So we're going to jump into our conversation tonight. I wanted to go back about 1 year, late February of 2020. I heard then President Donald Trump make a set of announcements. One of which was they were discouraging people from flying, traveling anywhere, and I thought that's a very bold statement coming from the President of the United States. That is a pretty severe statement. And I started immediately thinking about what kind of impact that was going to have on hospitality industry, on the leisure industry, hotels, airlines, and thought, this is a lot of people being affected. And of course, at that time, we had no idea really what this virus was about, what was going to happen. And I thought, that may be a prudent move. I don't know. I guess no one knows, and that's maybe why we're doing this, and why the president's making some of these announcements, why other people are encouraging these types of things. But from almost immediately, I had a very uneasy feeling about, if we're going to respond to a widespread potential pandemic that's turned into a pandemic at this point, obviously, if we're going to respond to that, we need to do so very carefully and think about the unintended consequences of what could be caused, the economic fallout, obviously, and the long-term effects. Are we doing anything that we can't reverse? Or is there anything that's going to happen that's going to become a new normal permanently? And of course, none of that could be addressed effectively at the time. And so I think most people said, that's fine. Let's see what happens 2 weeks from now, a month from now. Let's see where we're at, and we can kind of redefine what we need to do. And then fast forward, here we are more than a year later, and last weekend I see this. David.
We're testing. Please, if you're watching along, and if you do not hear the audio for this video I'm about to play, please note in the comments so that perhaps I can fix it. We're going to... Premier Ford responds to criticism of late response in enforcing stricter measures. Correct? This is the video you sent me, Steve?
Yep, should be Sylvia Jones speaking.
Here we go. mistake. Here we go.
That is why, after consulting with public health experts, we have made the deliberate decision to temporarily enhance police officers' authority for the duration of the stay-at-home order. Moving forward, police will have the authority to require any individual who is not in a place of residence to, first, provide their purpose for not being at home and provide their home address. Police will also have the authority to stop a vehicle to inquire about an individual's reason for leaving their residence.
Oh, David, let's pause it. So I apologize. Sounds like we don't have audio, David. So we'll have to we'll have to work on that. So this is Sylvia Jones. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, Deputy Premier of Ontario.
And Solicitor General.
And Solicitor General of Ontario.
Yeah.
Saying that they are introducing what she referred to as enhanced police tactics.
Authorities.
Can't remember. What's that?
Enhanced police authority.
Enhanced police authority, that if you are out on the street as a pedestrian or in your vehicle, that the police would have the option or the authority to stop you, ask you why you are not at home and what your address is, and then imposing fines of up to $750 if they, I guess, don't believe that your reason for being out and about, or in Canada, oot and a boot, that if that wasn't commensurate with the COVID restrictions, that you could be fined. And so stop for no reason other than you're simply outside of your house. So I guess with that, I've got lots to say about that, but maybe I'll turn it over to David at this point. I'm no longer Canadian. I'm an American. So, David, what the heck is going on in Canada?
I want to spend some time on that. I do want to try one thing in case some people can then hear it. It would be great if people could hear this. So.
Oh, there was a couple people who said actually they heard the volume maybe.
Okay, we need to find out because I thought I had done it correctly, and I don't want to waste time.
Thanks
here.
Thanks for helping us experiment here. We're moving on to bigger and better things. So somebody shoot us a comment on Facebook Live if you hear this video, or don't.
Did you hear the last video? Or is that's definitive?
Gil Gilbert says he does have audio. Audio is working. Oh, so we're talking specifically audio on this video that we're about to play, this YouTube video. Yeah. So let us know if you hear it.
Okay, hold on. Copy that. Oh my, we need like a producer. We need someone. I'm going to control the audio
we need
here.
A lot of donations, financial donations, so that we can buy a staff.
Yeah, that would be great.
And David can relax.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this on screen.
To temporarily enhance police officers' authority for the duration of the stay-at-home order.
Shucks.
Moving forward, police will have the authority to require any individual who is not in a place of residence to, first, provide their purpose for not being at home and provide their home address.
But we can't.
Police will also have the authority to stop a vehicle to inquire about an individual's reason for leaving their residence.
Good.
Do you regret or do you acknowledge that it would have been, as some critics have said?
That's all we wanted to play. Okay. Now, I think, Steve, you were then asking what's going on in Canada. And let me say first that this Solicitor General of Ontario, if I could just direct my next message to you personally, I want to tell you that you are not my parent and you are not my boss. And the patronizing, condescending, teachery tone that you're using does not make permissible the heinous drivel coming out of your face. Truly, these authorities that you're talking about are the kinds of things I expect of totalitarian, communist, socialist, fascist fools, not Canada. And so, Steve, what's going on in Canada is, as a result of her and Doug Ford's maniacal rules last week, we had police forces right across this province go public and say, we will not enforce this. We had police forces publish statements that they don't feel that they need these authorities, nor would they act on these authorities. We had civil rights organizations speak out against it. We had political parties right across the spectrum speak out against it. And thankfully, because at least we're reminded that we have some sensible people, and some people that have actually read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Thank you for letting me rant a little bit, but then the next thing that's happened in the following days is that Doug Ford and this Sylvia Jones have both somewhat retreated from their statements, and I'd like to play a video of that as well so that people can hear how they've covered their tracks a little bit. But Doug Ford, for example, went on screen today and came to tears because I'm the guy that has to make hard decisions, and I'm the guy that has to bring be the messenger to you, and sobbing on camera as if he's the victim, right? Doug, you're an elected official. We gave you some limited authority to represent us, not to save us. Government is not a savior. It's not a force of nature. It's a group of normal citizens, no smarter than your neighbor. It's a bunch of infighting liars who on any given afternoon are figuratively stabbing each other in the back. And then this pandemic happens to bring profound authority to their offices, and they're using it in such disgusting ways. I'm just like, stop me, Steve. Stop me.
Well, so I think I agree with the sentiment. I'm sitting here smiling a little bit and kind of chuckling at your rant.
Do you know where? Do you know that
But
golf?
honestly, if I lived there, there, I think I would feel as agitated or more than what you do.
Golf
the
is
condescending
illegal.
tone, the parental sort of attitude that she took, as far as I'm just trying to protect you, and the American government's doing the same. Joe Biden's one of his first addresses, and I think I've mentioned this before, one of the first major addresses he made, he said, what is more important? What more important job does the government have than to keep the citizens safe?
Right.
And that
is not the job.
Safe from outside political forces, safe from a foreign military intervention, perhaps. Safe from disease, safe from stupidity, safe from ignorance, safe from want, safe from poverty,
harmful content,
harmful content.
We have a minister of so-called heritage in our Liberal government right now putting forward a bill that will make what he calls political taunts a chargeable offense in this country. Political taunts. So if you don't like your politician and you speak out against it, these things I've just said about Doug Ford and Sylvia Jones could be illegal in 2 weeks. Okay? In Canada, that we can't criticize our government because it's political taunts and it might be considered harmful content. These politicians have gone way overboard. carry on for a minute, Steve, please, because I want to share another video because, like I said, Sylvia Jones has sort of, at least the optics of it look like she's redacted some of those statements and some of those authorities. But let's listen. Let's listen carefully to her. I'll give it over to you while I get the video ready here.
So something I thought was interesting. I saw a headline from a different place in Canada where David and I grew up in Saskatchewan, and it said the mayor of this city made the comment. I just read the headline. Admittedly, I didn't read the whole story, but mayor says she is disgusted by protests. And then it went on to say what the protests were about, and they were anti-mask protests that were happening at a location where they were doing vaccinations. And I thought it's so important for us in North America to celebrate protests, to understand how important it is to be able to have dissent. There's nothing more problematic, there's nothing more dangerous, or not many things more dangerous, than if the 400 odd million of us in the United States and Canada all start to agree and walk in lockstep and not have dissenting voices. I mean, that's the road to totalitarian.
You got to hit the T there.
Totalitarian government. That's the road to ruin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. It takes a whole bunch of people generally like-minded, generally affable, and generally getting along, generally trusting each other to have a good society. I mean, that's an important component of getting along is 90+% of us are generally going to agree on most things, generally agree with how we should do things and how we should get along. But it is equally important to have that small minority who says, no, I don't agree. I want to test that. I want to act in the face of that. I want to rail against that. I want to crawl to the mountaintops and shout as loud as I can why that's wrong. And that's important too. It's incredibly important to our society's functioning, the way that they were meant to, the way that our governments were meant to. And I hear this sentiment, and it seems like it's getting stronger. We all want to get out of this. Who says everybody needs to get vaccinated? Everybody needs to wear their mask. Everybody needs to stay home. Everybody needs to do what they're told and do what they're supposed to so that we can get to the other side of this. And that is dangerous. And I set aside whether or not I or David or anyone else personally agree or disagree with that's the right approach to mitigating the pandemic. The more you push that in a compulsory manner, the more that voice of dissent, that minority of people tend to say, wait a minute, the harder you try to make this compulsory, the more I feel responsible to provide dissent.
Yeah.
And that dissenting voice grows. I think at this point, I've always argued that without enforcement, we would have seen about as much compliance with mask mandates, with lockdown mandates, with social distancing, with vaccination. And now I'm starting to get the feeling like the compulsory tactics are actually reducing compliance.
Yeah.
Because there's a chunk of people who are saying, I just need to be against this for the sake of being against it now, because Facebook pops up 4 days ago saying, would you like to change your profile picture with the little symbol that shows you've been vaccinated and show your support for vaccinations? And I'm like, no, thank you. And so I clicked the X, and it said, you will no longer see this on your feed. The next morning, same thing pops up. I click the X, you will no longer see this on your feed. And every day when I go to Facebook, it pops up saying, are you sure you don't want to show your support for vaccinations? And now I've seen some homemade ones with mimicking the same symbol saying, I'm not vaccinated. And it's like, that's what compulsion gets you. That's what compulsion drives in people is this start to question, start to like, I mean, I'm happy to comply if I can make my own decision and come to a logical decision on my own. But when I have people like Sylvia Jones, if I lived in that constituency in Ontario and had that said to me as a citizen, I might not be as reserved as David is. Anyway.
Okay, so I have a video queued up here. Let's see if we hear the video. Again.
So if we don't hear it, we'll just let that play through and comment.
That's right, that's right. I think we're going to hear it. Please comment in the Facebook feed if you do not hear it or if you do hear it so we can confirm. And here we go.
Thank you. So we have reinforced and refocused Ontario Reg 8-21, the enforcement of the COVID-19 measures. If a police officer or other provincial offence officer has reason to suspect that you are participating in an organized public event or social gathering, they may require you to provide information to ensure you are complying with the restrictions. As I have said repeatedly, this is all about ensuring that people only go out when it is absolutely necessary to ensure that we limit the spread of COVID-19 and protect our intensive care bed capacity.
Supplementary question.
Sorry. Let's listen carefully to, focus on her words there, Steve. Now she is saying essentially the exact same thing, but she's using the word may require, right? So a police officer may require a citizen to present their ID, to prove why they're out of their home. Using the word may require. Now what the officer has some agency about whether or not to use lethal force against a Canadian citizen to demand their identification and the reason for leaving their house. The officer, isn't that what we heard on Friday? That officers now have this ability, that they may now do this, they may require these things of the citizens. So she hasn't changed the rules at all. And by the way, what actually practically happened, what happened in practice was playgrounds were now allowed to open or stay open. Whereas on last Friday they were supposed to now close. But let's be careful here. You're still not allowed to gather on a picnic table or a park bench in a public park. Steve, if you and I were going to meet at the local coffee shop and we walk in with our masks on and we each buy a coffee separately, but then we together walk side by side and talk while drinking our coffee, for example, on the way home or to a park, that could be deemed illegal, okay? We saw a video of, and maybe I'll try to find it here, we saw a video of a cop assaulting a 12-year-old boy in a park because they were skateboarding. Okay, did you see that one, Steve?
No, I heard about it. I didn't see the video.
I could probably find it in a few seconds if you allow me. So go ahead and riff for a while on what you heard from Sylvia.
Yeah, well, this takes me back to the conversation that we had with Len Fall with Police on Guard a few weeks ago, and he talked a lot about how much discretion officers need to have and how they need to exercise that discretion and uphold the Constitution. And I think that should be a fallback. I mean, there shouldn't be a whole bunch of, honestly, idiotic dictates and policies on the books that the police then have to decide whether or not it's a good idea to enforce those. But at least police in Ontario, it seems like by and large, came out publicly in a lot of cases and said, we're not going to enforce this. This is ridiculous. And it comes back to why wouldn't the government in all of these jurisdictions simply say, here's what we're up against, folks. Here's the best information we have. And here's the best information, the best advice that we have for you as individuals. This is what we feel like will ensure your safety. This is what we feel like would be a responsible thing for you to do as individuals to ensure the safety of people you work with, people you interact with, and of your families. And we really need your help. We really need your help in knocking down the cases and the load on our hospitals and our facilities. And here's exactly where we are day to day. This is what it looks like in our hospitals. This is the percent of capacity. This is, where we feel like our breaking point is, and this is how fast and how close we're going to have to. And then get into those weeds and those details for anyone that's interested. And I think you have the same result. But what you don't have is this incredible divisiveness, right? Because David and I are sitting here trying to have a civil conversation, and it would be easy for me to elevate and to put myself in David's shoes as a citizen, as a resident of Ontario, and really start to freak out a little bit. Like, the government can't do this. And this is like, we're quickly approaching that line where we have to, grab our guns, so to speak, and go out and
let's be careful
defend the Constitution or whatever. However, we're not trying to do that. That's what fundamental freedoms, that's what this podcast is about, is finding that middle ground, right?
Okay, so I have a video ready here. Maybe let me get back to that. But finish your thought, though, please.
Well, my thought is, so yesterday I'm listening to a radio program, and this is what I think was the logic. I'm not sure. People who are on our side, right? Anti-mask, Republican, right wing, whatever you want to call that side.
I don't
and
know.
I'm listening to this radio show, and they said, some of the vaccines were based, some of that research that provided the necessary groundwork for the vaccines was partially based on some of the extracted research from aborted fetal cells from the 70s. There's those, it's highly contended whether research should be done on those aborted fetal cells from the 70s, right? Because there was research. And so you use that research on those cells to then make other scientific discoveries and do other scientific research. And someone along the way said, abortion, in my opinion, is a satanic practice. And so then now there's this idea, I think it's going around Facebook or whatever, on right-wing circles, saying that the vaccines were based upon satanic rituals. And I'm like, okay, that now you've swung the pendulum in a ridiculous way, the opposite direction, and it doesn't help. Just because I want to toss an egg at Sylvia Jones and her whole song and dance there about, we're going to keep you safe or whatever, doesn't mean that why do I need to make the leap and start making fun of people who are wearing masks? I see somebody wearing a mask outside, somebody riding a bike by themselves in the park wearing a mask, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. But maybe they're on their way. Maybe they're wearing the mask at their job, and they're on their way 1 block away to the store where, again, they're going to be wearing a mask. And they just think, well, rather than taking the mask off and holding it in my hand, I'll just ride the block on my bike with my mask on. I don't know why they're driving by themselves in a car with a mask or walking by themselves with a mask. And I don't, that's fine. Or maybe they feel like that's providing some extra level of protection and safety for them. That's fine. Just quit with the compulsion. And both compulsion from both sides, the official compulsion from governments and this tisk, guilt trip, virtue signaling, like if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ratting each other out and all of this. I mean,
So Steve, let me
Sorry.
interrupt you. And yeah, good. Thank you. I mean, you've captured a lot of what's in my mind as well. I want to play for you a video, and then I think I have a version that's kind of in slow motion. Now, I have to admit, this is a bit disturbing. So, parental guidance. Here we go. And I do understand people are hearing the videos. That's excellent to know. So after, one of the things we have to understand is after an elected official like Sylvia Jones, the Solicitor General of Ontario, goes online and says, we're giving police these new authorities. We have to
David,
carefully consider whether
I
the
just
police will in fact use those authorities, even though many police said they would not. Here's an example of an individual officer acting like what I would expect of a the stories I've heard about the brown shirts in the 30s and 40s. Here we go, Steve. What do you want to say?
I was just going to clarify. So Solicitor General, I mean, that would be equivalent to what we call Attorney General,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, she's basically the top law enforcement, political law enforcement officer in the province of Ontario, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, it's not clear to me how she directs authority into the police forces of Ontario. Maybe the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, maybe they actually derive their authority from her office directly. I don't know. Although I thought that the judicial branch, which I think she is a part, and but maybe she's not speaking as the Solicitor General in that moment. She might be speaking as the Deputy Premier,
Okay.
which I think she is. I don't know clearly in which hat she's wearing at the moment. But anyway, here we go. Turn up the volume, and here we go.
Trust me. What are you doing, bud? He's 12 years old. Come here. Well, he's failing to identify if anybody else does. You guys, this behavior is unacceptable. Dude, what are you doing? You said to clean up the car.
Okay, now I have another version of that, which is a little easier to see, I think. But yes, that's a police officer in front of a 12-year-old boy at a skate park in Gravenhurst, Ontario. And this 12-year-old is not armed, didn't provoke the officer physically, nothing of the sort. Like, all of that's been established by watching these videos a number of times. Here we go. There, it hit the ground.
No, trust me. What are you doing, bud? He's 12 years old. Come here. Well, he's failing to identify if anybody else does.
One has to ask, why are these officers in the park at all? What are they doing there?
This is a case where, personally, I don't know.
If I were the officer, I think I would. Well, clearly there may have been other officers who chose to drive past this park.
Yeah.
Okay, and then these two decided to stop, and that one decided to assault this boy. For the crime of what? Being outdoors? Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to. I mean, obviously, right now, politically, we've got some crazy things going on with police enforcement and police intent and brutality.
I want
and all
so
the rest of it,
badly
but-
to support the officers in their plight, in their terrible circumstances. I want to, I hate last year the all the rhetoric around defunding the police and abolish the police, and they've been dragged through the mud, and yet clearly there are some bad apples here that need training or so I do understand that this officer is now sitting at a desk. Okay, the Gravenhurst Police precinct or district or whatever we call it did announce that this officer's been taken out of active duty for now, or sorry, public-facing duty. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. A little kid could get mouthy, and and he wasn't being very subservient, which I don't know that he has to be in that case.
doesn't.
Like you
He
say,
doesn't have to
what's what's wrong with what he's doing in the
I think
first
what
place,
happened
but-
is he didn't identify himself. He said, "Why do I have to tell you my name?" Or we
Yeah.
don't quite know what happened prior to this clip, but he's 12, unarmed, didn't rush at the cop, or obviously there's nothing this boy could have possibly done that would have required
Justified
force,
cop giving him a shove. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the kind of situation that compulsory methods like that breed. I mean, this is what happens.
I want to share with you another aspect of this problem. So I said earlier that we had people speak up about this from right across the political spectrum. We had police forces come out and say, we're not going down this road. We're not using these authorities. You can, hey Sylvia, you can have them, right?
Yep.
Now, I don't know if this is just off topic, but it's related in my view about how governments have been politicizing the pandemic in so many ways, in so many disgusting ways. And so there was a response to these events over the weekend that I found really disturbing, and I want to share it with you. Help me with the nuance of this, please, because it's a little difficult to talk about and remain, sort of on side or remain in the bounds of what is typically considered acceptable right now. And I'm going to share my screen and read something to you. So I had a letter from my member of provincial parliament. This letter came to me via email because I subscribe to basically every representative in my riding. Okay, so this is Peggy Sattler. She's the member of provincial parliament for London West, where this is my riding. And I want to make a note of something here. She says, on Friday, the Ford government responded to the biggest health crisis. New police powers and a clampdown on playgrounds and outdoor sports and such. Not only did these new measures suggest blah, blah, blah. Law enforcement agencies, including the London Police Services Board and the London Police Association, rejected the extension of police powers. Now, this is the sentence I want to talk about. Anti-racism and civil rights advocates warned that increased policing will unfairly target the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities that have already been hit hardest by COVID-19. I mean, there's some, so let's just handle this last piece here. Yes, certain groups, certain demographics have been hit pretty hard by cases because it spreads in areas where people live in close proximity, or carpool to work, or work in factories, and so does any of that, just on the face of it, have something directly to do with race? I don't know. Clearly, we could make an argument that there are people of all stripes and colors in high density areas that carpool to work, that work in factories that are susceptible to the spread of COVID and so on. There's not a lot of evidence, though, that these folks are that folks of that live in high density areas are coming down with harder illnesses, or that the fatality rates are higher in those areas. At least, so can we just leave that point? Did I cover that off well enough? That I want to talk about the first part of this sentence. Anti-racism and civil rights advocates warned that increasing policing will unfairly target the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Can I just ask the question? Would these anti-racism and civil rights advocates be perfectly okay with these extended police authorities if they could be reassured that it would be applied equitably across the population? Because I saw lots of articles and statements by civil rights advocates and these anti-racism groups, stophate.ca or whatever, and they come out and they say that these police powers will get used to disproportionately against people of specific colors and so forth. But none of them said, just on the face of it, we don't agree that police should have these powers because Charter of Rights and Freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I was really disturbed that people wouldn't just come forward against these enhanced authorities on their own merit, because they're a problem in and of themselves, regardless of any question of race. Help me out, Steve.
I'm not sure. Got a comment that my voice is echoing. I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe take me down just a notch or something, see if that helps. But I don't know. I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody else, and I don't know, specifically some of the groups you're talking about stuff. But generally, less policing, less reason to be policing, would result in less police unfairness, I guess, or uneven policing in general. And so, yeah, I could see kind of the disconnect that you're talking about there a little bit. Like we're okay as long as this can be equally applied. We're okay with more policing, and it's making too many things compulsory in the first place that causes these problems. We've got one of the notable cases here is Breonna Taylor, who was shot, I think, essentially in her bed while she was sleeping, or just had woken up, and cops busted in doing a drug-related search or whatever and started shooting in the crossfire. She got killed unarmed. And it's like, well, back up to the root of that. The police wouldn't have been there if possession of drugs wasn't illegal in the first place. Because she wasn't, there was no accusation. There was no, it wasn't like she was a drug kingpin and had been murdering people or anything else, or her boyfriend or the other people she was involved with, or what, I can't remember all the details of the story, but it was obvious that if drug possession and drug use wasn't illegal in the first place, that's one police involved shooting, death that never would have happened in the first place. And so you could make that a little bit of that correlation to now this layer of potentially COVID, enforcement that's going to happen, and enforcing people to stay in their homes, enforcing people not to have parties and to socially distance, to wear their masks, to, it just, and again,
it increases the number of transactions between citizens and police officers. And by increasing the number of those transactions, you're increasing the probability of, clearly, if an officer were to come to me and say, I want your ID, and tell me why you're not in your home, I would tell them to go and, kiss it where the sun doesn't shine, as politely as I could. And that gives them reason to then consider not lethal, but the use of force, some use of force. Like what does Sylvia Jones really mean? That the police may require a citizen. The word require is rather binary there, isn't it? May require. May is kind of, that's the word she's injected to make all of these crazy rules of hers sound more acceptable. But what she's still talking about is giving every officer in on the beat, so to speak, the authority to question any citizen for any reason and make demands of them about their ID. What are they carrying? Oh, I don't like the backpack you have. I want to open up your backpack. Like, what else can they do, right? It's just increasing the risk between these the citizens and the officers. Add to that people that may have had past encounters with police. Add to that people that may be currently on parole and therefore are really skittish about any interaction that might be out of bounds. It's bad news. Bad news.
Let me wax here a little bit.
Sure.
So, I don't know. Did you ever play the game? Well, most people have heard of Sim City, right?
I didn't play it more than a few minutes.
A little bit passingly. So,
Yeah.
so there was one. They made a version called Sim Earth,
Okay.
and it was basically you instead of a city, you were building an entire Earth, and you could tweak all of these things like plant forests, and that would create oxygen and cut down the carbon dioxide, and you could kind of control the temperature and control the climate, and then control the amount of physical disasters that happen and all the but the thing I just think of that all the time when I'm thinking about these issues and the idea of levers. I go back to the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz with all of his controls, like we're going to bump this, we're going to tap this up, we're going to ease back on this a little bit, we'll increase this, and these levers generally don't work. Mm-hmm. And these politicians, and not just the politicians, I don't just blame the politicians, I blame us for demanding or thinking or being under some illusion that the politicians have these special, powerful levers that can affect the way society works. Like and then
I think I honestly believe the more information I see, the more experts I watch, I really believe 10 years from now we're going to all realize that the spread of COVID is largely seasonal, and like. In fact, let me share this on screen because there's a really good bit of research that just I noticed recently, indicating what looks to be a high correlation between. Let me share the browser here. It's just an image, Steve. I need to show. So do you see that well enough?
Yeah.
Are you seeing that? So this is data which show a correlation between the stringency of lockdown policies and total deaths per million. Now, it took me a while to really look at this carefully. Now, notice on the bottom left-hand side of this graph, there would be 0 deaths per million, okay? And you can see there's many countries that have done quite well with very low fatality rates per million, and almost regardless of lockdown policy, okay, the stringency of their policies. Now, if we look at the horizontal line starting just under the number 60 on the left, and then it extends right across the screen and shows that it rises to about 65 on the far right. That's an average of what the researchers call stringency, okay? It's becoming obvious, I think, that where countries have taken a harsh approach to lockdowns and restrictions on the citizens and such, they have also seen higher rates of death per million. And so it seems no matter the strategy by various governments, and we can look at jurisdictions with like Ontario with tons of lockdown. Like in Ontario, golf is illegal. Golf. It's like, where else do you go where you really don't interact with humans, except maybe 200 yards away, outdoors in the sun. Okay? Golf is illegal. Ontario is the only jurisdiction in the whole North America where you cannot golf right now. And it's ridiculous. So these rules are so arbitrary. You can look at jurisdictions with virtually no lockdown against jurisdictions with heavy lockdown, and their rise and fall of cases seem unaffected by government policy. I think 10 years from now, we're all going to look back and say, yep, seasonal spread explains all of it. Lockdowns have been a terrible disaster.
So let me keep that up. Let me make just a couple of comments. One, about the golf. I mean, devil's advocate, it's like, so you're going to take 2 or 3 or potentially 4 different households, and you're going to put members of those households in a golf cart in close proximity for 4 or 5 hours.
Do you not think those same households are going to just spend an afternoon on the patio barbecuing together?
Well, maybe.
Those same 4 people are going to gather for brews and barbecue, whether it's on a golf course or not.
Yep, maybe. I guess, so looking at this chart, if I'm understanding it correctly, if lockdowns or stringent COVID mitigation strategies worked well and worked in a correlating way, you would expect to see that cluster be on the left, up at the top left, and then going down to the bottom right, correct? Is that correct? Like, you would have less and less deaths per million, the more you got stringent. And so you would see this line from the top left to the bottom right.
That's right. So if lockdowns work,
that's what you would see, or something very close to that.
You could take jurisdictions like Canada, where lockdowns have been heavy. You could take jurisdictions like New Zealand and Venezuela, and you would expect to see them all in the top left of this chart,
right?
If lockdowns worked, and you would expect to see regions like Texas, Sweden, all at the bottom right.
Yep.
That's what you would expect if lockdowns work. And that's not what we see. That's not at all what we see.
Yeah, it's not. There's a interesting, this is something that Ant and James talk about on Words and Numbers, that I think is a great example of how pulling those government levers don't always have the result that you think that they will, or any result, and that is taxation. So the amount of GDP, if you look at the percentage of gross domestic product that is taxed on an annual basis by the federal government, that has existed in a very narrow corridor between like 16.5% up to about 18% for the last 60 or 70 years. And you think about incredibly high interest rate environments, good economies, roaring economies, horrible economies, crashes. You think about Democrats having control of all 3 branches of government and instituting extremely high tax rates. We've seen effective tax rates for the wealthiest class as high as 90% during that period of time. We've seen it as low as 35 or 39% other times. We've seen, massive ideas about trickle-down economics where we said, we're going to cut taxes and that's going to increase the economy so much, and that's going to drive more tax revenue at the end of the day. And we've seen the opposite approach where we're going to raise the rates. All of these levers have been pulled or attempted to have been pulled. All of these different tax strategies, all of these different, methods of collecting the money from the populace, and the populace as a collective, almost like this unspoken rule says 17%. That's what we're going to give you. You can raise the taxes as high as you want, and we're still going to give you about 17% because we'll find loopholes, or we'll leave, or we will choose not to make as much money. Or if you want to drive the taxes down, then we'll do even better. And, and so you have lower tax rates, and we'll still give you about 17%. But it's not going to change. That's the unwritten, unspoken willingness of the populace, the willingness or the ability of the country to pay is about 17%, and it hasn't really changed.
So let me ask you a question then, because if you use everything you just said about taxation and money and use it instead with regard to freedoms and personal choice, liberty, let's say.
Yeah.
One could argue that people in various states across the United States will go about their lives largely unaffected by the politics. They might wear a mask, or they might not, and it really doesn't matter what Joe Biden says. Okay. Canada has shocked me, though. Like, we've not maintained this 17% acceptance of government policies regarding lockdowns. Canadians have said, 95%, yep, I'm going to go along with it. You take control of my life. You stop my business from operating. You tell me I can't leave my home. I'll go along with you. I have been absolutely shocked how many people are going along with this, and I've wondered why. I have a friend who has a hypothesis, Steve, and the hypothesis is Canadians have never had to practice defending their rights, apart from foreign involvement in faraway lands for, such as the World Wars. But on home soil, Canadians have never really been tested, and we're just not good at it.
Well, could you switch to the other view, David?
Yeah.
I want people to see my...
But I have something else I want to put on screen if we can, so carry on. And
then
I'd like to bring
actually,
another one up.
My feed was just was frozen until you switched it, so...
I didn't see that.
But we're good. We're good on the live, so... so Canadians have never been tested. I think, too, there's an element of Canadians are nice. I don't think I know that that's a stereotypical view of Canadians are nice and polite people or whatever. I think that there's a degree of truth to that. There's a seed of reality there. And so that nice translates a little bit into agreeableness.
Okay, but Frank Zappa has some advice for us then. There's a big difference between kneeling down and bending over. Thank you, Frank Zappa. Canadians, yeah. I know you're nice.
But
let me show you.
Yeah.
I'll get it queued up here. You carry on.
Like I said before, it's important to have a whole bunch of agreeable people. We need to generally get along. We need to generally be okay with what's going on. And a great way to achieve that general peace and that general agreeableness amongst everybody is for government, honestly, to stay the heck out of everybody's business. To have government be as limited as possible. And we can, that way we're free to appeal to each other's good natures. We're free to live, especially in behind the walls of our own home, the way that we see fit, to raise our children the way that we see fit, and the kind of the ultimate law is we just don't interfere with anybody else's ability to do the same.
Steve,
and if
carry on without me. I need to talk to my daughter just a moment.
Oh, okay.
No, get out
If
of
that's
get
the
it-
general sentiment, then then I think all of these COVID mitigation measures can work better. I think they could be more effective if everyone's left to make their own good decisions and to take the information that is available publicly and say, yeah, I feel like I need to be part of the solution. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do my piece. But as soon as you get government saying, oh, that seems like a good idea, we need to enforce that. We need to use compulsory measures to make sure that happens in every case. All of a sudden, you just start to split people. And there's a lot of people who would say that's on purpose, and there's a great reset coming, and all the rest of it. I don't necessarily buy that. I think it happens accidentally a lot more than it happens on purpose. And I think there is a lot of room for well-intentioned, good, sensible politicians to create some terrible, terrible legislation and terrible laws out of good intentions because they think, and if we keep asking for it, let's go back there. We have to go back to that point too, is if we keep asking for it,
Yeah.
government save us, government pay us, government take care of us,
Then we'll have bigger government.
Then they're going to believe, well, that's what they're paying me to do. That's what they elected me to do, was fix problems. So I gotta get on these levers. I gotta push these buttons. I gotta look at these percentages and these statistics and these trends, and I gotta force them to go the other way. And David makes a great point. There is an overarching trend with a disease that is going to do what it's going to do to some extent, regardless of any mitigation measures we take. It can certainly help, can certainly affect, but we can't erase the disease by, doing a simple set of
So let me interrupt you there, Steve.
or whatever.
And I think everyone can hear me now. And sorry for the interruption. My daughters needed. They're watching a movie on Netflix, and I have a timer on their device so that the screen will time out after a certain amount of time. And so they were like, "Daddy, can you give us more time?" And of course I will, so that you'll go back upstairs quietly and not interrupt my stream. But
Speaking of unrighteous authority, David.
yeah, I'm a tyrant. No, I'm a parent. Okay, there's a difference between parenting and being a tyrant. So experts demand scientific debate on COVID with Premier Ford. I saw this today, and I wanted to share this with you, Steve, because I find this remarkable. Okay, a group of 9 doctors. Let's look at some of their credentials here. We're looking at a professor of laboratory medicine and pathobiology, Faculty of Medicine, University of Toronto. Professor of immunogenetics, Department of Pathobiology, University of Guelph. Viral immunologist from Guelph. Biochemist from Waterloo. These are not freaks, these are not the people standing on the street corner yelling at the air. These are educated, serious people, and they want to call the Premier to a debate. The topics we want to cover include, but are not limited to, the following 7 things. They want to talk about what are the actual dangers of SARS-CoV-2 by age. What is the rationale for the current vaccine rollout and alteration to the manufacturer's recommended vaccination protocols? Steve, are you familiar with the fact that Canadian governments have basically been just throwing vaccines at people as fast as they possibly can? And the reason they're doing that is because Trudeau was supposed to procure, X number of millions for the population, and he's fumbled it from day one, leaving the provinces with virtually no vaccines to put into people's arms. And so they said, at first, this particular vaccine, we're supposed to give 2 doses 4 weeks apart. And then they were like, well, we're going to stretch it to 6 weeks. And actually, you know what? We're going to stretch it to 4 months. And then now they're saying, actually, people only need 1 dose. And then they're taking any old vaccine and just giving it to any person of any age now. They're saying, you know, that this particular vaccine was tested in, you know, the elderly population, but and we have no data to see how it's going to work in children. But hey, bring your children down and get a vaccine. They're just making it up as they go along, totally outside the bounds of the research that was initially performed on these vaccines by the manufacturers. I don't know how they're getting away with it. It's crazy. They want to talk about what controls are in place to limit the number of cycles used in performing PCR tests to 30 cycles to avoid undue false positives inflating the cases reported. Yeah, could we have a talk about this? Could we debate this in maybe in our parliament? Is that allowed now? No, it isn't even allowed to have this conversation. These doctors are risking their jobs to publish this letter. It's bizarre. That's what's going on in Canada, Steve. How effective are the stringent population-wide restrictions, and are they the best response given the collateral damage? Can we have a chat about collateral damage, Doug Ford? Are we allowed to talk about that? Are we allowed to? And why are early multi-drug treatment measures proven to be highly effective not being employed to save lives in Ontario? So, Steve, like Ontario hospitals, and I would love to get someone from an Ontario hospital to come and talk with us. But what I hear, okay, so this is hearsay. I have no evidence around this because the Canadian healthcare system is not transparent, right? It's totally opaque. And what we know as a population is only what leaks out of that system. But what has leaked is that some treatments, like the use of the early dosage of ivermectin, or even advising clients to take, you know, some extra vitamin D, don't even say the how do you say it? Hydroxychloroquine?
Hydroxychloroquine, yeah.
I got it right. Hydroxychloroquine. Don't even say that word, okay? It's not being used. Yet it's been proven to be effective, and these doctors want to talk to the Premier about it. That's what's going on in Canada, Steve.
Which is just like, why wouldn't you want to have that open debate? And honestly, why should it even be a debate?
It
Why
should
does
be
it
a
have,
debate.
like,
No,
like,
don't say
why wouldn't we just have endless, instead of having these daily press conferences where politicians come up and say, this is what we're going to do, these are the levers we're going to pull today, this is what we're going to try now. Why not just have an open room for anybody, the 10 people on C-SPAN or whatever who are actually watching anyway? Why not have 15 experts just in a round table going around and saying, well, I think we've seen this, and then somebody else can kind of debate that and say, well, I think that is skewed because of these factors, and, you know, and economists and other experts trying to give some lip service to what they referred to as the collateral damage there.
Yeah. Well, why isn't that taking place? Is why that debate isn't happening because the people surrounding Doug Ford here in the province are paid shills, and I don't mind saying that because it's just the fact. The conflicts of interest among the members of what's called the Ontario Science Table are well documented and reported. You know, for example, we've got this Fisman character that is paid as a consultant by the Ontario Teachers Union, and the We Charity, which is a very, you know, Trudeau-friendly organization. He's paid by them, and he's on the Ontario Science Table advising Doug Ford to, for example, lock down the province, COVID zero, until you give paid sick days and decrease class sizes in schools. I wonder why he's saying that. You know, might have nothing to do with the payments he's getting. But that's true. And by the way, there's a shout out I'd like to give to a very mysterious author who was doing fantastic work to uncover some of that and do some really good journaling about the Ontario Science Table and some of their affiliations and how it is that they're bringing some of these policies to Doug Ford. And to shout it out, I'll say, I could maybe find the website, but it's called No New Normal. Look for a blog called Old Norm. I should find that out. Let me find that out while you're talking, Steve.
Let me make one comment, diverge just here. I promised I would bring this up. Somebody was engaging with us about it prior to the podcast tonight. So there's you'll see some internet posts and some talk going on about the Nuremberg Code,
Yes.
which is the 1947, during the Nuremberg trials with the Nazi war criminals. They came up with 10, because medical experimentation was one of the things that was going on in Nazi Germany. And so they came up as a group of medical professionals, medical people from all over the world, in response to some of the things that happened at Nuremberg, came up with a code of 10 principles, basically. If you're going to do medical experimentation, these are the 10 absolute requirements to make it ethical. And there are things such as the experiments should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. No experiment should be conducted where there is a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur. The degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. The experiment should be conducted only scientifically qualified persons. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end. So the number one, though, the first tenet of these 10 codes, it says the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. And so it's like you hear Nuremberg in juxtaposed to the COVID vaccines, and my immediate reaction was kind of eye rolling, like, oh, here we go, a reason why COVID vaccines are like Nazi Germany, and Dr. Fauci is Hitler, and all of these things that you hear on social media. But honestly, as I researched that and kind of read through that, I mean, the vaccines were all created within the last year, and
Well,
I mean,
okay.
I
want
mean,
to be clear about that. I happen to believe, and I think I know for a fact, and there's documentaries from a few years ago about people exploring these sorts of vaccines, like these mRNA. This is not a brand new technology, but what is brand new?
The groundwork's been laid prior, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but what is brand new about it is just the rapid rate at which they were pushed through trials and
Right.
and just accepted by governments. You know,
Yeah.
like
And so
the trillions of dollars of investment that suddenly came into that marketplace in the past year. Like, don't tell me that's caused everyone to, take cautious steps forward. No, people are rolling in the money and loving every minute of that, and pushing the boundary of what they're able to do and how fast they can get it out and make as much money.
Okay, so
make hay while the sun
question
shines,
is,
so to speak.
The question is, in terms of Nuremberg, if you're going to use that as a conversation point
Yeah.
in regard to vaccines, are the vaccines experimental? And
Yes.
I think it would be hard to argue that they're not, at least to some degree, experimental at
Well,
this
no, they're
stage.
so experimental, in fact, that the Canadian government has absolved the manufacturers of any liability. Okay?
Yeah.
So taxpayers will pay damages to other taxpayers if there are terrible consequences of all of this. I want to show you something
so-
related to that Nuremberg Code, Steve, because
Okay.
also in the Human Rights Declaration, which is here, Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. And when you read supplemental material about this article, the security of person relates to, for example, the Canadian government is demanding that when people leave our country and travel back into our country, that they have to take a COVID test, the kind of test, not just any kind, like, spit on a cup or,
Yeah.
spit in a petri dish. They have to shove a swab into your sinus cavity. And that is expressly prohibited by the Human Rights Declaration because it enters the body. Okay? And the Canadian Human Rights Declaration, and in fact, the Quarantine Act of 2005 says, it's Article 14 or something, says that any Canadian, in a pandemic circumstance, may be required to, for example, talk to someone at the border when they enter the country. Tell them do you feel any symptoms, and tell me a little bit about your medical history. Have you ever suffered from heart disease, or someone in your family have diabetes? And so the government's allowed to ask you those questions, but they're not allowed to put anything in your body. And yet we have this government doing all of those things. Are you frozen, Steve? Oh.
No.
There's one other thing I wanted to share quickly while I was talking about it earlier. If anyone's interested in some really interesting journalism, independent journalism regarding the state of politics and the Ontario Science Table in Ontario, please check out Old Normal Ontario. Just subscribe. I have, and some of the articles are very interesting. I just so appreciate that that they're doing the work.
Old Normal Ontario. That. I was at lunch with some guys today, and we were talking about different things, and we thought, could we? Because there's a lot of discussion now. I've heard discussion in certain circles about, look at how low the flu numbers are, and I don't want to get into a conversation about why that is or how that works, but look at how low the flu numbers are, and wouldn't it be a good idea if we just kept wearing masks indefinitely? And we were kind of talking about, imagine our grandkids, going, Grandpa, I went out today and there was somebody not wearing their mask, and you could see their teeth and their lips. It was disgusting. Could we evolve to a point where that is our society? And if we're not seeing each other's faces, if we're not talking face to face, so to speak, what does that look like? I mean, what are the social ramifications of that? And
do you know the story of the monkeys and the banana?
Tell me.
Okay, so there's 5 monkeys in a booth, in a cage, and there's a ladder in the middle with bananas on top. And of course, the monkeys want to climb the ladder to get the bananas. But the scientists, what they do is that as soon as the first monkey decides to start climbing the ladder, they get sprayed with high pressure water. And then the next time it happens, they get sprayed, and it's a violent spray of water to scare the heck out of them, and it's probably a little painful on the skin, just enough to not puncture the skin, but really startle the animal. Soon enough, what happens is when one of the monkeys starts to climb the ladder, the other monkeys pile on and beat him up, and that becomes the pattern. As soon as a monkey wants to get up to get the bananas from the top of the ladder, the others beat them up. Now, that then becomes the behavior. Soon enough, nobody is ever going to the top of the ladder. No one wants to even try climbing the ladder. Then what the scientists do is they swap one of those monkeys for a brand new one. So the new monkey, what do? The very first thing they do is they start climbing up the ladder, and the other ones beat the hell out of them until that monkey stops trying to climb the ladder. Now they're just one of the 5. So then they swap another one out and bring a new monkey in. This pattern continues until all 5 monkeys have gone through this experience where they've entered into the cage, they've seen the ladder and the banana, they start to climb, and then they get beat up. All 5 of them now.
And now you have 5 monkeys that have never been sprayed with water. They
Never.
just all know we don't climb that ladder. That's not what we do.
That's not what we do. Yep.
They
Have no
should be-
direct experience with the punishment. They don't even. Now you can. It's just crazy. So that's what's happening. This dystopia you're describing of, our children, our grandchildren talking about how, it's so gross. I saw someone's lips today. They didn't have their mask on. That could be our future here. Steve, I think there was one other thing. You shared something with me I wanted to bring up on screen. Can you see that? Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I just thought this was an interesting article I came across on CNN today or yesterday. U.S. may soon reach a tipping point on COVID-19 vaccine demand.
Just
Here's
a
why
moment,
that's-
Steve. Of course, CNN does not respect the end user in this case. They just blast their audio directly out. They autoplay their video despite what the user wants or needs. So I'm just going to pause that. And can I just scroll out of here?
Yeah.
We don't need to see Joe Biden talking. Okay,
No, so
back to you.
I'll just briefly tell you the uptake of this. So may reach a tipping point. The tipping point they were talking about was we could have this terrible situation where supply of vaccine actually outpaces demand. And I was like, well, isn't that a good thing? Like, so there's too many vaccines, no one's lined up to get them, and there's just extra vaccines. Like, haven't we been feverishly clamoring to
get
make
to that
that
point?
happen? And now they're talking about, so, and the idea in the article was, so now what are we going to do to make sure that we keep that demand up? Because they talk about some statistics like, so much percent of people under 30 are considering not getting the vaccine. So much percentage of the military is considering not getting the vaccine. People in certain states seem prevalent to making the decision not to get the vaccine. And so how are we going to fix this, right? And let me just make a departure here, because I don't know if anybody is listening who maybe we've already scared anyone off who disagrees, but if you are sitting here watching us, and I feel like we're being somewhat reasonable, I don't think I'm spouting conspiracy theories. I don't think I'm, accusing vaccine manufacturers of being Satan worshipers or whatever, but obviously I do have some concerns. So if you're watching this and you're saying to yourself, oh, just do it. Just get the vaccine, just social distance, wear your mask. Yeah. Why are you worried about this? Why are you accusing the government of all this stuff? And why are you going down this road? People are dying and we need to fix it. And why don't you just do your part? And my question to you, if you're of that mindset, is what is the appropriate venue? What is the appropriate way for me or anyone else to approach you or to approach society or to approach our government representatives and say, I think we need to have more conversation about this. I think that some of these measures are are
Come
two.
and talk to Steve and I on our show.
Yeah. Yeah, we would love to talk to you on our show. We'd be genuinely welcoming and genuinely interested to hear your position. But that's my question is, I mean, it seemed like these people, this group of 9 doctors trying to approach the premier and say, can we have a roundtable on this? Can we debate some of these issues? Can we talk about this? And getting that falling on deaf ears. Well, then what choice do people feel like they have other than to elevate and get more shrill and potentially more divided and more loony in some cases about what they believe or what they advocate or whatever, and we just have this divisiveness. And I really, the last few weeks, have started to feel like it is the compulsion that creates the divisiveness. And again, compulsion from the government and this social compulsion,
It's not just the compulsion, it's the compulsion that is seemingly, or not even seemingly, it is evidently disproportionate to the harm.
Yeah.
Like, if this was something like Marburg disease with a 70% fatality rate, and we were seeing tens of millions of people get this disease in our, in the United States and millions in Canada, yeah, maybe some of what we're seeing from our police forces and our military and our government would be understandable. But it's not Marburg. It's not Ebola. Also, the compulsion backed by such opacity and misinformation. Like in the city of London, Ontario, it was, I just noticed last week that the city has now started to publish the deaths due to COVID over time. Okay? They didn't used to do that. It was just a number. This is how many people have died. And you'd go back the week later and it was just a number. What does that number mean? Is that, like, it was difficult to track the history of that. And so, like, in this city, Steve, there have been weeks on end with 0 fatalities due to COVID. Weeks on end. And yet we're not able to go out and golf. We can't go to a campground. I can't take my kids to a outdoor public swimming pool. Or 0 deaths in the city for days and days and days on end. Does that sound like a pandemic to you? It doesn't sound like a pandemic to me.
Yep.
Is there risk of the sky falling? Yeah. I mean, if we hear about a variant that turns out to in fact be super deadly, okay, maybe let's have more discussion about it. Let's have a debate in our parliament. Let's have, more transparency. Let's get better data. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing journalists and politicians use totally dishonest language around this. They're saying, this variant from India is more infectious, they're saying. What they really mean is it seems to be spreading faster, and we have no information, no data proving that it's more deadly. But they use the word more infectious. That's dishonest. Add to that then the compulsion based on this dishonest reporting. I'm done with it. I'm done.
Yep. And I'll still argue, and maybe until I get rounded up and thrown in a cattle car or something, I'm still going to defend politicians, and I'm still going to choose to believe that most of them are acting from a righteous intent. And what you're talking about there with the twisting of the information to some extent, it's an issue of the end justifying the means. It's like, well, we're going to make it sound a little worse, or I'm going to let the public think that, because we have to control the public, because controlling the public and their individual decisions and behaviors is one of the best levers that we can pull right now to affect some kind of change. And I think that's misguided. I think it's wrong, but I don't think it necessarily comes from a place of ill intent. And
I do. I'm starting to think actually that their intentions, first of all, it doesn't matter what your intentions are if the results are terrible. But I do also think that some people in powerful positions in Ontario, and maybe, not maybe, but certainly in the federal government as well, have bad intentions. And I'm actually shocked by what I read on Twitter, for example, people demanding bigger government, more government intervention, more control of the citizens, more penalties, and you can't sit on the Ontario Science table and have such a bias like that. You shouldn't be allowed to sit on that table and have the ear of the premier and put forward, because you're a lobbyist. These people are lobbyists. They aren't scientists. They're not medical doctors. They haven't been practicing medicine. They've been in university ivory towers, and for decades and decades, and now they're lobbying. I'm just rather disgusted by it. Intent.
Maybe, but that is our fault. I think.
Okay, I agree.
That is our failure to hold them accountable to some extent, but much more fundamentally than that, it's our failure to have the right kinds of conversations and to have the right sort of expectations of government. Mm-hmm. It's like, I need to be able to say, like Jordan Peterson, when he took his stand and said, people can use what pronouns they will or whatever, but I should not be compelled to use specific pronouns. That's all I'm saying. That is not a proper form of government. And then, but if you're going to say that, you need to be equally as quick to say that if something you agree with is being backed by government force, that you say, even though I agree with that, it still isn't appropriate for that to be backed by government force. I don't like, and Facebook shouldn't be meddling with the feeds and doing the things to try and push the public sentiment in such a way as they are. They shouldn't be doing that. And people need to hold them accountable, possibly by getting off of some of those services, by demanding, by using it differently. But then again, you go one step further than that. Ted Cruz should not be sitting out in Congress demanding to hold social media companies accountable and demanding that, creating government intervention to force them to not meddle in that way. It's like, because you get into this self-fulfilling cycle, this cycle of madness where, now there's a different problem and we need more government mandates to fix that problem, and then that's going to create unintended consequences, which we will fix how? With more government mandates. And the answer is to back this whole train up and say, we're all reasonable people here, fundamentally. If we're not reasonable people fundamentally, then our systems of government in North America, the United States and Canada, will not function for long. We might as well try a dictatorship, maybe, if we're all a bunch of idiots or a bunch of ill-intended, evil people.
Quite afraid.
But we're not. We're not.
But I'm afraid that's what people are. That's what some people are in fact arguing, and I want to maybe change the subject here to that more directly. But before I do, I want to share with you a good example of what you've just described. We have in Canada right now, there's I think it's called Bill C-10, which is it's now known as the censorship bill. It's the federal government of Canada wants to police what is published on the internet, okay, and disallow any content that they wish or don't wish, disallow it from entering the Canadian borders. Now, the way that this works technologically, I could understand, but it's a subject of a different conversation. But it's like literally putting imagine putting an iron cage around the Canadian internet, okay, and then you open specific doors to allow specific content in, and if some content is entering through another door you don't want, you just close the door, and now Canadians never see that content ever again. Not that, like, there's no message saying, hey, this is restricted material. And no, it's just, it disappears. It's like North Korea style censorship, China style censorship. That's what's being pushed in this bill. I'm not lying. I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
Well, David,
Blacklock's reporter has reported about this. But here's the thing. So you're talking about governments that want to try and pull levers and push buttons and stuff. The Liberal government is putting forward this bill. I would expect some other opposition party would say, whoa, that's not what we're doing in this country. That's not us. That's not Canadian. We're not going to do that censorship. You know, we're all reasonable people. But that's not what the opposition is saying. The opposition is actually starting to just argue and debate about who gets to control the lists. Okay? There's going to be a list of allowable content and lists of disallowed content. And the argument isn't whether we should have this censorship mechanism at all. It's the argument is now about who gets to control the lists. And it's disgusting, Steve.
No, and I'm right
you and I
there with you.
might just one day, any of the visitors that are watching us here right now, one day I'll just not be available to you. I'll be having this conversation with Steve, and you won't ever be able to access it because we're talking about, I don't know, COVID misinformation, or we're saying things that are critical of our government.
Yeah. No, so on that point, so I had a friend who had moved here recently from India, and he grew up in Iran, had moved to India, did his college, his master's and doctorate in India in computer science, and he was working while he was going to school in India, and he was working for Facebook. I said, where did you work? He said, for Facebook. And I said, well, that's interesting. But what is it like working for Facebook in India? And he had to explain to me several times what it was he was doing for Facebook in India, because it was so foreign to me, the idea of what he was doing. I didn't really understand it until he specifically walked me through it. And he said, Steve, I go to my desk, and I know Farsi because I grew up in Iran. And so the Iranian and Iraqi governments, they have agreements with Facebook saying you're allowed to come in here and have our citizens as users on your platform, whereby you can advertise to them and make all kinds of, crazy amounts of money. That's fine. But we have limits and we have standards of what kind of information they're allowed to see on that platform. And you say,
that's what we have in
Canada.
It's
Facebook. How can you control that? They have literally
armies of moderators
of these people, and he spoke Farsi, so he went in there for his 8-hour shift, and he got on the computer, and he just went and read through Facebook feeds and said,
think about this.
That comment is not allowed, that post is not allowed, and he just went and deleted stuff all day long. That's how they control it, and it's like literally happening.
Yes.
But in Iran and Iraq, that's the Middle East.
That's exactly what's in this bill. Precisely that sort of moderation, censorship. Let's call it what it is. And so just imagine that. Now in Canada, we need public servants who are on contract to moderate what other citizens say or post or share. And just imagine now, like next year, 1,000 people, the year after, 5,000 Canadians, maybe 50,000 Canadians, all on the payroll as censors. You know,
like
Okay,
what kind of
let's
what
change
kind
the
of
subject here a
society
bit.
is that?
well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you the society it is. There's a document here I want to share. This could be a whole other conversation, but let me bring it on screen. And let's keep, like, we've been at it a while, Steve. Maybe do you want to do this another time?
Maybe, yeah. We're probably seems like about the magic time where we should be wrapping up.
Then let me give you a teaser so that we can talk about it perhaps in the future. So this is a page I found called "Core Differences Between Fascism and Communism." And Steve, I read through part of this and was like really disturbed by the bias in it. And this relates to what you were talking about earlier about intent. I think some people in Canada and in the US have nefarious intent, and part of, and it's informed by such terrible education about politics. Watch this. I'll give you one example of this, and then maybe we'll make this the
Oh,
subject
I'm
of
not sure I want to see this, David. I'm going to
Oh
throw
my
up in my
gosh.
mouth.
Yeah, I know. So this is a chart someone has put together about the difference between, and what is worse between communism or fascism. And I want to show you just a few things here. The meaning of each. Fascism is an authoritarian state led by one ruler. Communism, a system that upholds economic equality and advocates a classless society. You're seeing dystopia, utopia, right? So first of all, that's not at all what communism is. Communism requires a ruling class. It requires the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Class system.
Theoretically, it doesn't. But in practice, how do you do that without
Yeah, so let's
a
look at
ruling
this.
class?
In practice, the political system is one charismatic leader. This is fascism, right? On the left, fascism,
Yep,
yes,
yep.
fascism right here. One charismatic leader has absolute power and authority, and then they give examples of Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, Rivera. I wouldn't know all of these names. Mosley, Pelly. The political system, however, of communism is a stateless, classless, and governed directly by the people. Never mind this list of totalitarian freaks, right? Never mind that list of Castro and Guevara and Mao Zedong.
Isn't there a couple names missing
Ho
here,
Chi
David?
Minh and Stalin. Never mind Lenin and, never mind all the people who have literally murdered tens of millions of, like these are genocidal maniacs on both sides of this table, right? Don't tell me that communism is a stateless, classless, governed directly by the people. But Steve, you can see if that's what's being taught about communism, it explains why there's a whole generation of people at Twitter that call each other comrade and are proud Marxists. Go search Twitter profiles and people will identify it in their little biographies. Marxist. I'm a Marxist. They'll say, really? Did you not learn what happened in communist Russia in the 20th century? Did you not learn about the gulags?
It comes from good intent, very little or no education, and people saying, but you listen, I mean, you look at the news, right? If you're a 22-year-old kid and you look at the news and you say individual white cops are murdering individual black children. Bezos has hundreds of billions of dollars and other people are starving in the streets. some people have to work for $7 an hour while other people make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There is so much unfairness. There is so much that is wrong with our society. We have to do something about it. We have to pull the levers. We have to, somebody has to do something. Somebody has to make a law. You get passionate about it, and you look at something like communism and you say, that is the ultimate lever. That is just the big daddy. Put everybody in a box, strip them of all of their individuality, and put everybody on the same exact footing and start over. And that's and it sounds good to people.
Oh, it sounds really
good. If
good.
they would just go on Netflix and watch any documentary about anything that happened in the 20th century. You don't have to go back to the 1500s. Just look at the 20th century carefully.
But you could go back to the 15. You could go back through all of human history, and you'll find monarchy after authoritarian after monarchy after authoritarian until roughly the 1700s, when you suddenly find something called democracy. Look at this one here, Steve. The ideology, fascist ideology. There is a union between the state and business organizations, but the state tells the business what to do. And on the communist side of this, someone has wrote, all people are equal, and there is no sense having classes. And yet, like right now in Canada, we have such a good example right now of centralized governments, both that call themselves conservative, like in Ontario and Manitoba and Alberta, and also the NDP in British Columbia, who call themselves socialist. We have, I don't even know what's going on out in the Maritimes these days, but like PEI was completely locked off from the rest of the country. You couldn't even go across the bridge into the island. But these are politicians of all stripes across the spectrum, and yet they are all acting like totalitarian tyrants. The federal government in Canada is a liberal government, so to speak, and yet they have a command economy where they've saddled up to some extremely powerful business organizations, and they pull the levers together. I mean, so by this definition, what we see here between the liberal elites in Canada and the Trudeau cabinet, according to this definition, they're fascist. Anyway, so this whole page is crazy misinformation. But
I just noticed we've got this important piece of information explaining why communism is better, but there's advertising on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whoever runs this website, Core Differences. Oh, well, they just provide comparisons for all terms. But whoever wrote this particular article is clearly looking through rose-colored glasses at the communist spectrum here. One thing they do get right is in terms. Well, they get this wrong about fascism. Fascism also abolishes the notion of private ownership of property, and we can see evidence of that if we call Nazism fascism, the Nazi Party did in fact demand local factories to, they basically annexed the companies, forced the companies to manufacture war goods and such, which abolishes the ownership of property. They took houses and art and riches and wealth and money from any of its citizens in order to redistribute it to the other citizens. And I found this and I thought there's really not much difference between communism and fascism. I don't know why this author seems to think that communism is so forgivable and charitable.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. I'll take that off screen.
Thank you. Thank you. Those of you who've been watching. I've been seeing some comments. In fact, maybe we won't respond to them necessarily, but just to give you a sense, the media needs to be accountable because they have used fear enforcement, knowing the damage and control. They have been paid $600 million to control a narrative. How is this okay?
1.3 billion, 600 million. If this is about Canada, I think the number in 2020 was 1.3 billion.
Is that talking about how much money the government actually funded to the CBC
and other
media?
CTV Global. There's a number of them.
Yep.
I don't know the figure, but it's like 600 million is the lowest estimate.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, how is that limited government in any way, shape, or form?
That is the number that is the number Trudeau admitted to 3 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Long before any of this COVID thing took place. Yes, yeah. Canada. I'm reading from J. Luke White here. Canada is turning into a police state. Yep. Now, is it temporary? I mean, it could be 3 weeks from now. The cases start to drop, and all the politicians start to repeal these authorities. Or, like in Portland, Oregon is now making mask mandates permanent. Did you read that?
Yeah, I've read some things about that. Yeah. And so,
oh my.
It goes back to us, to you.
Yeah.
What do you expect out of your government? And it's not. I think it's even more important than going and shouting from the rooftops about the evils of the government. However, I think there's a place for that and a need for that dissonance.
I needed that.
But even more
tonight.
But even more importantly, and I think Brian Hyde did a good job of talking about this when he was on our podcast, just do your thing. Just be self-sufficient, make your own decisions, make your decisions for your family. And if that
act
going
locally.
About your business, if that puts you at odds with the government, well, that's where you have to make some tough decisions sometimes and say, I will or I will not accept this treatment or this rule, and be willing potentially to deal with the consequences. But I think that so much of it is simple and fairly without consequence. And if we had a groundswell of people saying, I'm just going to do my thing, and I'm going to be as respectful about everyone else who also chooses to do their thing, that's the way I'm going to live my life. Well, if the government represents us, then eventually we'll have politicians who more likely believe the same thing. I'm just here to help kind of push, help to babysit the government for a short time and to take as best I can the sentiment and the wishes and concerns of my constituents and bring them before a more public body. And then when I'm done, I'm going to go back to my private life and do my thing again, just like everybody else does. If that was the way we organized our lives and organized ourselves and continued to demand that the government be organized that way, so much heartache, could be resolved. So many things could be easier. But again,
so there's
if you disagree,
here. Yeah.
Just if you disagree with us, or
you
know somebody, you have a neighbor that disagrees or that you think is eloquent and well-spoken and would like to argue against, we would love to have that conversation in a really respectful way. Every podcast we start, it's okay to change our minds, including us. I'd love to change my mind if somebody could, convince me. I love to learn new things and open my perspective. That's great. We have great respect for people, especially people that we disagree with, and we don't have to start the conversation trying to win an argument.
There's a question here that we should respond to in future, Steve, and that is, it's our former guest Todd Miller asking, what would you do? He agrees with government overreach, etc. But if you held the power, what would you do? And how about we make that the topic of our next discussion, or a discussion in our near-term future?
I have a pat answer for that, Todd. I would do anything. What I would do is I would try and get as much good information in the hands of the people as possible. And I would let an expert stand up and say, here's all the reasons why we think masks may work, but it's the opacity. David made a good example. It's like, if we're going to say we think that masks may work, in fact, we have a strong feeling that masks make a big difference, we really encourage people to use masks, then some other doctor is saying, or this group of doctors in Ontario are saying, we think that a heavy dose multi-medicine regimen early onset makes a big difference and could save some lives. Why is one met with, obviously, we have to create laws and we have to enforce that, and the other is met with ridicule and stonewalling? Yeah. Like, let all of that. That's what I would do if I was in charge.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
I'll close on this point.
Here's what we know, and you're going to have to navigate that in your own life and your set of circumstances the best way that you can. And we implore you to be kind to each other and to give other people the space to do that the best way they know how. And yeah.
Good answer. I'll not answer that, but I want to make one last comment, and then I think I'm done for the night. It's been a great conversation with you, Steve. Yeah. I really appreciate it. But one last comment here. I think it's really important in my past year, like something that's been important to me through this past year, is to observe and seek out all kinds of information. And one of the things that has affected the way that I interpret that information or take it in and ingest it is, for example, to look at these people are, near to the Premier, or they're near to our Prime Minister, and they're on the payroll, and they're saying this. And I know that comes with some experience, but it also comes with very low risk to their job. They're getting paid all kinds of good money to make this message that happens to be in line with what the politician is also saying, and so on and so on. And then I hear other information from these highly credentialed expert doctors and immunologists and all kinds of titles that I can hardly pronounce because they're so specialized in the field. And they are literally risking their jobs and their tenure and their ability to publish and so on by bucking the information coming from these other parties. Someone doesn't go into the public sphere and say these dissenting claims with such risk to their livelihoods unless they really think it's important and are really passionate about it being said and about it being debated and about it being discussed. And that's affected the way I take in a bunch of the information that I've been witness to over the past year or so. So whatever De Villa says in Ontario, or Dr. Williams, beside Doug Ford's podium, I'm going to take with some grain of salt. I know that they're driving an agenda, and they're bringing forward just the right information that is optically aligned with what they want citizens to so-called comply with. And yet these other doctors are bringing forward very sincerely this research that they've done, and it's like we should have this conversation at the very least.
Yep.
I'm done. Thanks for the
Thank you,
chat,
David.
Steve. I've been a little more. I just think whatever's going on in Ontario right now needs to absolutely stop. It's people should be going golfing. Golfing should not be a criminal offense. Like Doug,
I'm going
Ford,
golfing tomorrow.
You gotta. You've gone crazy, Sylvia Jones. You've gone crazy.
Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Really grateful to those that are tuning in and giving us a look, and please interact with us. You can
If you
email.
know someone who wants to interact with us or may disagree with some of what we're saying, again, we've had some wonderful guests that largely agree or that we have lots of common ground. We have found it harder to find people with whom we have less common ground, but we think, I think that I would learn a lot from those conversations. I would try my best to be well behaved and and fair. Thanks for the chat,
Yep.
Steve. It's nice to be
Yeah.
with you again. Yep.
Fundamentalfreedoms.org. You can reach out to us there. Some written content, access to all of our videos and podcasts, and we'll say goodnight for now. Thank you.